Hello, everyone again. We are very happy to have Marina Gržinić with us today. This is our last lecture within the project New Forms of Exceptionalism, Art and Necropolitics in the Age of COVID-19. And Marina will conclude this lecture series with the lecture titled The Pandemic World. Today, Professor Gržinić will address the question of necroaesthetics of borders, I would say, refugee crisis in the condition of COVID-19 pandemics. And just to introduce Marina Gržinić very briefly, Marina Gržinić is a philosopher, theoretician, and artist based in Ljubljana, Slovenia. She is a prominent contemporary theoretical and critical figure in Slovenia. Since 1993, she has been employed at the Institute of Philosophy and the Scientific and Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Science and Arts. Gržinić does innovative work in practice research. She's a collaborative video artist, and since 1982, he has worked together with Aina Schmidt, an art historian and artist also from Ljubljana. Gržinić's theoretical work is informed by contemporary philosophy and aesthetics after modernism. Her work is directed towards a theory of ideology, theory of technology, biopolitics, necropolitics, video technology, and transfeminism in connection with the political aims of decoloniality. And so on. Thank you. We may proceed with the lecture. Marina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and hello to everybody. Let's go through this last lecture that I put in such a pompous way, Pandemic World. And what I want to talk about is practically two parts that I would like to share. Some readings, but also maybe just going through some PowerPoints, presentations, depiction of this lecture. So the first part of my lecture is actually connected with already in 2020 a text that I write with the title Refugees, Europe, Death and COVID-19. And I make this connection with all this isolation, closure, disintegration of forms of governmentality in connection with the refugee crisis. And I tried at that point to make a direct relations and to see where this leads us. Why in the second part that will follow, I want to tackle some very concrete forms of what is proposed as the title of the overall series of lectures. This is exceptionalism. I found really interesting this word, and to see how these forms of exceptionalism are, for example, active in Slovenia. You will think this is something that is very local, but I am sure it's something actually that from this Slovenian case expands throughout Europe, especially expands into what is called former Eastern European space. So if also I thought, thinking if in 2020 maybe this was really an important topic because the refugee crisis was very present, I was making a research, and it's another reference for you here, and this is Robert Kuliš, who in his text that was an editorial text for a special number of social sciences, and it's just published in December 2021 with the title COVID-19 and the Creeping Necropolitics of Migration Control. It's a very good title because it actually shows practically the necropolitical on many areas entering fully as a conceptual tool, but also the changes, the intensification I will say that we also see with this exceptionalism of every relation. So it's not anymore immigration control, but crimmigration control. So the criminalization of the immigration, it's a part of all these control mechanisms. And if I quote what was written just 1 week ago, because I made a research, I said, has this sense? Can we go back to this 2020 text? Is there elements that still are important for us 1 year after? I found the description by Kulish interesting and even more telling for us. So I quote, I start with quotation. Anti-immigrant narratives shape public opinion against immigrants and make them more vulnerable to attacks by governments and right-wing vigilance. Throughout the history of immigration, pandemics have been associated with exclusionary narratives against foreigners. Nation states have sought to blame racial and ethnic minorities for human suffering at home to distract from their own failures to protect populations. Scapegoating the ethnic and racial other like this during pandemics is in line with anti-immigrant discourse in general. The anti-Asian message in Trump China virus tweets, for example, can be traced back to the ruling of Justice Fields, who referred to hordes of foreigners in 1889 case of Chair Chan-ping. Similarly, the Chinese were blamed for the spread of smallpox in the late 19th century, and more recently for the SARS, just as Muslims were put on alert by the moral panic following September 11, 2001. So we see in these narratives, we see actually a kind of a situation, I will say, that it's coming near. How is this possible to be seen? What we talk about? With the refugees, we see as forced foreclosure, putting at the verge of the state, being the refugees are like foreclosed to a proximity of being imprisoned, being taken out of any kind of a possibility of inclusion in the society. And on the other side, or at the same moment, what is possible to see is this voluntary isolation. And use in the analysis that was made already in 2020, what was at that point in March 2020, just with the start of the pandemic of COVID-19, we had the situation at the Greek-Turkish border. I don't know if you remember, and in the same moment that this was going on, and what was this Greek-Turkish border situation? It was what I named at that point directly a dirty business between the European Union, Greece and Turkey. Practically, it was the goal of European Union to get rid of the refugees by any means, and it was offering an enormous amount of money for Turkey to seclude, to isolate, to imprison millions of refugees that were pressing coming to Europe. In the same moment, it was the situation that Italy, under an unbelievable situation of dying because of the COVID-19, was transformed into a medieval leper and set in a complete isolation. So what we can see is a situation of a parallel that it's also something of an antagonist moment. And if we start to think and first we get an idea, it's really an isolation, the things are very similar, they are actually resembling or reflecting themselves, we taking necropolitics into like an operation model, we see that actually this is not the case. That as I formulated and make a very short analysis of necropolitics in the past, when I tried to think how we think about necropolitics, and then I said, what is necropolitics? Necropolitics splits in these two poles. On one side, we see that what was biopolitics offering to the Occident is actually falling apart, is just moving away from our eyes. And we see this very clearly, that the welfare states are just gone. And what you have today is practically what I call let live. You in the Occident, you can live, but the state is not taking anymore this capacity of protecting the citizens, not the second and third grade citizen or non-citizens, but the very proper citizens are also left to live, let live. And on the other side, what is necropolitics showing? And in the same moment is actually producing death. So it's killing massively through different formats and so on. So with the pandemic, we actually, in relations to the refugees, we can see the very same operating mechanism of necropolitics. On the one part, you have to kill, because isolation, or it's maybe a form of life that is called deading life, something slow. You are not maybe killed, but you are on the way of actually coming to this moment. And it's a whole set of interpretations of these formats of life, and one can be set in this case, it's deading life. Life is just dissolving step by step. So you have to kill, and this paradoxically, one year after, a little bit more, is reflecting what is going on again on the European, that means European Union on one side with Poland and Belarus on the other side. And this is the case of November 2021. In December 2021, you have something that is completely normalized. Almost we take as the most normal things that a state is going into a complete lockdown. And what was now announced, it's regarding Netherlands, who is going into total closure. Others are in the preparation of going into this. So my discourse is not about if closure and lockdown is okay, but is to understand that the cry on the street, we are imprisoned, we cannot leave, we want to be free, it's a paradoxical cry, because it's in a certain way not the same that is happening to these people who are refugees, sans papiers, that are really imprisoned, led completely to the maximum of abandonment, and actually part of the killing machine. So we see the repetition in between these two parts of the necropolitical. On one part, to let live, because you go willingly into closure because you want to stay alive. So you accept on a certain level these lockdowns, and on the other part, you don't care. Absolutely don't care for those who are imprisoned, left to die. What is going on the Belarusian Polish border? It's I will say, something that really have to preoccupy us very, very strongly because of our impotency and not total not having any interest into that situation. It's very interesting that also all this question of segregation and closure can be connected also to what Valdemir Zamparoni in 2016, before the idea of that we will face this huge pandemic, is actually saying that when it's coming to voluntary segregation, and this to let live is a form of voluntary segregation, practically he said that this voluntary segregation can be seen also through methods that are central to the colonial medical environment. The outcome of this in the Occidental context, not in that context that cannot decide, that is actually really exposed to direct death, but in the Occidental context where we go into isolation, this also is connected with a certain way of thinking that you go into a form of self-isolation because of hoping for enabling immunization. Practically, it's a certain deep will to be into this isolation because you want to live, and you can, on a certain way, have a possibility to decide. So to kill and to let live are two different forms, but they are now covered with one another. So what we see from this is two sides of contemporary neoliberal necropolitics. So even necropolitics in relations to biopolitics, it's not anymore one. So it's not one form against the other, or one form that is going into other, but is a differentiation with necropolitics going from inside. It's that two parts that form necropolitics now are becoming clearly put on two parts in front of us, also because the pandemic show this proximity, but we have to be alert to understand that our isolation, self-isolation, is not the same as that what is a total foreclosure, immobilization, led to to die, to actually be exposed to a direct killing by different state and other apparatuses. Again, the Belarusian-Polish border is today the best and the most monstrous picture of what is going on. The reordering of spaces becomes crucial for necropolitics, because we see also in these differences that is presented through to kill, to let live, new practices of zoning and the creation of corridors as circulating modes through which accumulation will take place. Because of course, this it's also a form of capitalist accumulation. In which way? If you don't let people to come in, you actually are free not to take care of them. And that means you actually can save money and give more to the so-called citizens because you can abandon everybody else. So this situation lead us to the central point of the idea how this necropolitical function in relations to the pandemic. Death is taking the first place. Neoliberalism, it's as an ideology the other side. But already, as I tried to explain, of that proximity, something is actually a line of division. And the line of division is the divide that is going along the colonial racial divide. Nobody wants to listen in the Occident about this, especially those as me, and many of us are today at this lecture, that thinks our whiteness give us a carte free, that we don't think about the colonial racial divide, but practically in this division, to let live and to be exposed to death, to the killing machine that is not just dying, but is a whole system of structural system of imposing death, the colonial racial divide is actually the one that makes these two sides so clear in front of us, and also is central to the technology of necro-capitalism. Necro-capitalism, or the necro-power, is sitting directly on the colonial racial divide. And it's provoking many different elements, also regarding the way how we deal with the pandemic, and also regarding different models of seclusion, closure, differentiation, marginalization. So the colonial racial divide before the pandemic already induce a differentiation of something that at that point, until the 2013, was not clear. And because citizenship was always seen through the modernist way of understanding this concept as something as just you are born, and if you are lucky, you have the citizenship that allowed your mobility. If you are not, you are actually stuck and you cannot go anywhere. And then it's all this series of reasons why and for and against. But with necropolitics, with the new millennium, with what happened after 2001, and with the colonial racial divide that never before was starting to be so central for necropolitics and for the whole global world, we had an unbelievable case that our citizenships started to be divided along this line. So you have today a biopolitical citizenship and you have a necropolitical citizenship. And this necropolitical citizenship is not something that we could think before. We could think this exactly after the 2001. In which way? It was a case that happened in 2013 as a case that at least in my thinking, when I formulated this difference in 2013, was key to understand what is going on in front of our eyes in the European context and also in the global world. If you maybe remember, it's something so far, though it's not. In 2013, after all this refugee crisis just being present in the European soil, in the EU primarily, all the stories and narratives that were going on, it happened, this case of the Lampedusa situation, when 350 refugees from Africa drowned in one single day. And this day was October 12, 2013. What happened at that point? At that point, this fake moral conscience of Europe, EU, primarily, but it was the whole Europe, was struck by this, while the refugees were dying every day, every day for years and years, in bigger and smaller amount. But this huge amount of people dying in the front of Lampedusa made this shocking decision by the Italian government, backed up by the EU. That is very important to say. It's here not about blaming Poland, Italy, for example, Serbia or Slovenia. It's always to think that is a certain EU ideology that acts behind all these decisions, and the Italian government decided to give to these 350 dead people the Italian citizenship. Paradoxically to say, listening what was going on the Italian television, it was a crazy moment, because those who was escaping from Africa, hoping to get the citizenship, being alive and having a chance for a life to work and so on, was actually prevented always to get it. But being dead, they were granted the citizenship. And in that moment, I say, we see in front of us a new form, a mode of citizenship, necropolitical citizenship. You get this when you are dead. That means that our citizenship is actually a biopolitical. So this was the clearest sign of Western Europe perverse and violent new attitude toward human rights. Practically, at that moment, we could see the emergence of a new category of citizenship, necropolitical citizenship. This shift is even better described in terms of what Etienne Balibar in 2000 called the passport of a rich person from a rich country, which increasingly signifies not mere national belonging, protection, and right to citizenship, but a surplus of rights means in this difference. So the biopolitical is practically connected with this possibility, and even more is connected with capital that stayed behind. In all these stories, and being affected by this enormous, from 2000 on, enormous quantity of deaths all around us, in relation again the refugees, and then coming to this point of in which we find ourselves, first in 2020, from March on, the number of those who was dying and was smaller, but then it started to really go into a tilt, what I call in numbers. For example, in my analysis in 2020 in US, it was numbers that we talk about 100,000 of dead people due to the COVID pandemic. Today we are almost reaching 800,000. And so on and so on. But also the numbers of those who are as refugees, who are on run, who are without papers, who are actually exposed to death, is rising in a monstrous, through a monstrous number of cases. So this opened for me another question. what is actually with the possibility to make a relation in the concrete situation due to the pandemic, seeing people and around us that are dead because of the pandemic, because of the collapse of what the state were promising, but now we are clear due to the pandemic that all these health structures are just falling apart and so on and so on. The impossibility to actually give what is promised even in the welfare stage, not to speak of other parts of the world. And this possibility of relation that is in a certain way a possibility also of mourning all these people, to have a relations, to have at least a moment of thinking about, in both cases, in the cases of the refugees and in the cases of what we see imminent death because of the pandemic. So this made me think on the relation of melancholy, because melancholy was seen for a long as a possibility to think about or to have a sense at least of a relation to these enormous numbers of deaths. And making this analysis, it's very interesting that this relation today we see it's because also to try to save your proper life is just not important. We don't have these relations to the refugees. Nobody is interested what is going on the border. Practically, nobody care. You don't have protests of millions on the streets saying, hey, there are people left as in the game between two states, and we have to do something. We have to help them. We have actually to help those who want to come, who their homes are destroyed. If we think even about Afghanistan, that was practically left abandoned, completely not part of any discussion anymore, because we are so obsessed with what and how to survive, how to actually take this let to live. And why is this melancholy important? Because we see that death is produced massively, and at least it's in a certain way it's a question of our relations to this. And Freud already in 19 speaks of melancholy. Because the old melancholy entails a sense of guilt. So in a certain way, you want to take care for the other. But interestingly enough, in 2019, as we can see with all our terms, so biopolitical citizenship, necropolitical citizenship, you don't talk about biopolitics, but you talk about necropolitics. So all these terms from the 20th century are falling apart, or they get a proper genealogy. They just get the proper history. So Massimo Recalcati in 2019 writes and published this book, Le nuove melancolie, destini del desiderio nel tempo ipermoderno. The new melancholies, fates of desire in hypermodern time. And this book, it's important because he actually say that the melancholy of Freud, this feeling of guilt, of having a sense of relate to the other, is actually gone. And this is what we can see precisely in the moment that we live. Because he also in a certain way emphasize that this new melancholy, how he names it, it's characterized by the fundamental lack of feeling alive and also of lack of support for life. That was very important in the previous times. He also connect this with a very interesting relation that will bring us directly in the time that we live. He says that why we can talk about new melancholy, it's possible because it's a change between the subject and the object. And again, the 20th century was very clear. You had the subject and you knew what is the object. But he made an analysis, as he said, in the 60s and the 70s, Western youth sought about all to distance themselves from the fetishism of the objects. And we remember the 68, people wanted to actually have more subjectivity, to decide, not to be confronted with the dead, for example, institution. In the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he make this analysis. Practically, we found completely new system. Actually, the hedonism of consumerism, especially in the former Eastern Europe, starting to be more important than any political passion. And the apolitical mode in which we live is really part of this process. This absolutely let me live my life, don't ask me anything, but then moving from time to time. So also the former Eastern Europeans got and took this process fully by similarly as the counterpart, let's say, on the West. And this I could very much make when I tried to make a kind of a historization, what could be this kind of hedonism, this kind of absolutely not wanting to think about the other. And I found a very, very good case in something that relates to us so near, and this is the way how to think the Srebrenica genocide in 1995, and also with the paradigm of the melancholy of this relation toward the other. What happened? Are we capable to think? And what is the result of my analysis that is not only mine, but can be connected directly with some other theoretical positions, definitely Jarana Papic, is that the genocide in Srebrenica, that is now also termed as genocide very clearly, that took 8,300 men and boys in almost one night, 2 or 3 days in Srebrenica in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Their lives was taken. They were killed by Serbian paramilitary troops and also by different impositions in connections to what we know today, like Republika Srpska and other machination. All this practically didn't provoke in recent time, that are also connected with the time in which we live and the pandemic, any kind of guilt, any kind of rethinking what was going on. On the opposite, we have a paradoxical, I will say, monstrous, I can use the same word of hedonism. And this is that instead, not even of amnesia, not even of aphasia, not having the words, we see a specific mode, and this is the glorification of the genocide. And this glorification of the genocide that we see also through the measures that are now proposed by Republika Srpska is a new form of exceptionalism in the region. And as we saw that Recalcati is talking, that it's a new way of absolutely not having relations to the other, we see that this backwardness is even not backward, but is the glorification of the genocide. It's actually in relations precisely with the pandemic, in which it's no interest anymore. You just want to save your life. You don't want to think. You don't want to have any kind of rethinking or working through what was going on. So Recalcati is making this very pertinent analysis of what he called new melancholy, because he says that new melancholy is the mode of how we can also think of our behavior inside the COVID-19 time. He defined this new melancholy as a way of the mostly the Occidental subjectivities that has in relations to life a feeling of senselessness. Practically, it seems like the body is a dead weight and must be moved and pushed around. The Occidental subject is unable to connect with the other. And this we see very clearly again in relations to the refugees. Otherness is something that is put outside any kind of thinking. It's no preoccupation, no guilt, no way how to think outside of what is the borders of the fortress of Europe. And he make a reference to what is actually that we can think also in relations to the pandemic, and I quote, the absence of boundaries inherent in the freedom of the hypermodern turbo consumer has gradually translated into a widespread feeling of anxiety caused by the loss of stable symbolic reference points, but above all has given rise to a new demand for protection and security. We have thus gone from the manic emphasis relating to the dissolution of and borders to the need for their re-establishment and security enhancement. And this is actually why this self-isolation, this that we want in a certain way, we accept, we normalize the question of this lockdown. It's actually coming near to a paradoxical situation. The wish to come and to actually embrace even more borders, to be protected, to actually save a proper life. If we now come to another difference that we can read to the pandemic and all these histories that I tried to bring together, because we cannot talk about this moment without not thinking at least some decades in the past. It's also interesting that a lot of talks is these days blurring necropolitics and thanatopolitics. No, thanatopolitics is put as being actually necropolitics. But going back to this, what Recalcati was saying, what Membe is saying, it's clear that thanatopolitics, this situation that is very fundamental to the Western world of the subject as such. So what is, in which way is functioning this thanatopolitics? Is this emphasizing of the death drive that as we can think the death drive, it's actually a kind of, it's a moment of self-destruction, but is also something that wish to live. And the death drive that is central to the thanatopolitics coming from psychoanalysis, and it's exposed as central in the constitution and in the way how these thanatos and eros are working. It's actually more and more presented as something very occidental. It's connected with some kind of intimacy that wants more and more to be protected. To me, to be actually so protected that practically wants immunization, want to get all these shots, all these boosters, to be protected, to stay alive. But the effect of immunization in this case is also that you actually change into an autoimmune disease. More protections you want, you actually start to even attack the healthy body. And this is also something that can be seen with this lockdown, self-isolation, wanting, the Occident wants to use all the possible vaccination doses, while all other parts are actually left out of this. And this make the difference between thanatopolitics, and is not strange that is used instead of necropolitics in the Occident, because thanatopolitics is a pure Western category. It's located in Occidental subjective intimacy, but necropolitics, this is actually the externalization of thanatopolitics. More you want to be protected, you start also to attack everybody else around you. And it's also the implication that you are ready to kill everybody else that is actually attacking your intimacy, your wish, your longing for autoimmunization. So this leads us practically to make like a conclusion, and just to go briefly in the second part. And this means that the situation of the pandemic shows to us very precise differentiation that are blurred, and they come together, but they are not equal. We can think really of a difference between different geopolitical spaces, and we can think also of the difference of the way of interpretation of different modes of isolation, autoimmunization, lockdowns, segregation. Though they are now presented, we are all in the same. But this is not the case. Now, if I just go briefly into the second part, that is also for me interesting, because Slovenia can be like a laboratory, let's say like a small model of these forms of exceptionalism. And in the Slovenian context, just now, and also due to the pandemic, or because of the pandemic, or with the whole help of the pandemic, we got presently an extremely right-wing government that practically I express here with a new type of government that is not just a heightening of the necropolitical, but is really getting elements of a mafia government. That means is not working in that way where we can talk about parliamentary democracy, but is a mafia structure of criminal structures of plunder, dispossession, taking power on every public and other institutional framework, controlling everything what was not thinkable for us in the past, because you think it was like you have laws, you have structures. This is not the case. So how we come now to this point, this was interesting for me. And also another moment that can be seen palpable in Slovenia, and also it's possible to be seen on a much wider territory of Europe. And this is the case of a new form of death. So it's not just to be killed directly by the war machines, but what others before me much in the past already termed as a slow death. So you have a process, or what I used before, a word, deading life. So slow death, it's actually a term that was proposed by Lorraine Berland. It was already in 2007, and she was referring with this term to a specific situation of exhaustion, physical exhaustion of the population, and the decay of people in that population. So it was a situation that she was finding in the analysis of marginalized group, working class, and so on. So this slow death with the technologies of erasure, decontextualization, mafia government, and toxic atmosphere and psychosis, all these elements came to be prime elements of this exceptionalism in Slovenia that it's part of the pandemic. And more, all these elements are palpably visible in other parts of the former Eastern European context, and many of them are also part of the Occident, but in a different way, not so vividly clear, and not so without a shame implemented. So if I think of this technology of erasure, it's very important to see that this didn't happen now. So nothing is in this moment. It's not this that the things also in the state of exception doesn't happen that moment when they are evolving in front of our eyes. But practically what we have today, and it's part of the pandemic, it's something that started just 30 years ago as part of the constitution of this new state after the disintegration of former Yugoslavia. And in 1992, we had already the proclamation of the new state in Slovenia that were going hand in hand with what is today named erased people, because around 30,000 people from other republics of former Yugoslavia were erased from the administration of the state. They were practically left to symbolic or even real death, because many that wanted to go out of Slovenia without passports to go, or they were asked to go back to former republics of Yugoslavia in order to get the papers, in order to legalize their situation, and so on and so on. This was not possible. After this, we had the marginalization of the Roma community in 2007. And practically also we could see that the race that were demanding for their rights, we could see in the society collective social amnesia, and also the production of the third-class category of non-citizens, because they were actually without a citizenship, without the permits to stay. So they were really in a social death, and not only a symbolic death, but a status in which not only them, but their children for decades could not get any compensation from the Slovenian state, not even a social health, what we call alive but dead. In 2012, we had the production of this second and third grade citizen, because the LGBTQI community could not get the change of the family code that was rejected in the referendum, and made them not equal to other citizens. And then from 2020, that is a very important year, we had different groups that were working against the Alien Act. And this Aliens Act, it's one of the most monstrous acts of treating and putting the, not giving the shelter to refugees, abandoning abandoning what is primal for the Occident, and this is the protection of human rights. But we see that this is not even going on in the much wider territory of the European Union. So this take us to the Slovenian necrostate, as I termed it, and that is defined by toxicity, mafia government, and plunder, because the pandemic allowed for an enormous plundering and taking and disappearing of quantity of money, and also for this nobody is responding. The effect of this are four. So this story before, this history that I explained, now lead us to changes that we can identify in this Slovenian necrostate that can be new forms of exceptionalism. First, that the accumulation is based not on a classical state of exception. You don't have a state of exception in Slovenia, but you have a slow death. So it's exploitation and a population that is subjected to continuous slow violence. How you see this? We could see this with when the lockdown happened in 2020, and this was not only a case in Slovenia. The biggest price were paid by older people. They were in these special facilities. They were closed. They were not taken by the hospitals. People were dying. The biggest number of those who died in that period was old people. Then this exceptionalism also it's connected with a normalization of the decontextualization of necrocapitalism. And the decontextualization of necrocapitalism is precisely this case where the two poles are put together, but they are actually working in two ways, killing and letting live. And also that everything what is going in front of our eyes is detached from any kind of history. So it's a pure decontextualization. But as I try to show in the reference to Slovenia, it is a history of the erasures. It is a history of the pre-pandemic that it's working clearly with the pandemic. And also, as I try to present, if we think about just melancholy, if we think what was going on, for example, with the Srebrenica genocide, the glorification instead of working through, instead of any kind, not even amnesia. And then we talk about the new melancholy, where we are completely seeing that is no interest to actually think about. You want more immunization. You don't want to think about what was the ideals, what was the politics of before. The times that we live, it's a normalization of the decontextualization of necrocapitalism. So even necrocapitalism, it's not one. It's not a term that we can use as a face value anymore. It's falling and fragmented apart. We have to rethink its most internal history, how we come to necrocapitalism, and what are the parts that necrocapitalism is constituted of. Then we have circularity and self-referentiality. Circularity in terms of things repeating, and self-referentiality in terms of that it seems that is not the way out. And then, of course, like always, and specifically with necrocapitalism, the production of racialized, class-divided, and ghettoized forms of life. So now you can ask me, what are the possibilities for something that can be, as I said in the beginning, thinking about resistance? Is there something that maybe it's even not seen as politics? I found three pictures that for me are the most important activation of people that were put against not the pandemic, but against necro state of Slovenia, and what I described as the elements of this situation. And this is these images in which you see the protest. The protest was just recently going on. They are going on every Friday, but the importance of this protest is when thousands of people are coming together. And this happened 28th of May, 2021, where 40,000 protesters gathered together. We were there. You can see the images by the very known and important archivist of the independence of Slovenia, and before this, Tone Stojko. This is another image in which you see these waves, this sea of people protesting. And what was the statement of our mafia government? They said, ah, this is not a big number, though for 2 million of not even 2 million of inhabitants of Slovenia, 40,000 is an important number on the street, but nothing changed, nothing moved this mafia government. And the beginning of this protest was actually, and it's still every Friday protest. and now how this resistance was going on, for example, in the lockdown in 2020, where it was really forbidden by Janša, also because he feared of any kind of protest at that point, to come and to actually go on the street. It was penalties, it was harsh treatment of the people. So the history of Slovenia, where people are on bicycle, came as a proposal by a group of NGO and also people who put their forces together, and we started to protest with bicycles. And this period of the 2020, we were mobile, though secluded, mobile. And this photo I take like the last point of my presentations today, where it's written against dictature, against inequality. Janez Janša, our prime minister, fuck off. And I said, this girl with the flag, it's maybe something that we can really term a new possible way of making politics. It's not the same that we were thinking in the 20th century, but the situation, the ways, the possibilities that were open with these Fridays, and then it came this big protest, and the sheer image of this taken by Tone Stojko made me thinking of this possibility, how you oppose on a certain symbolical level these forms of exceptionalism. So in another lecture, I will say thank you very much, but I will say now no, as in a bad Hollywood film. I will conclude this to be continued.
Thank you, Marina, for this very challenging and actually excellent lecture. We now may open discussion. So please, if there are some questions, we would love to hear them. Maybe, I mean, I always actually opt this. Okay, Matija is here.
Yeah, thank you for the lecture. It was really interesting. What you mentioned at the end is kind of the situation we were in Serbia right now, where protests are going about Rio Tinto and the factory that they want to build. And also the media tried to hide how many people were at the protests. For instance, like there's pictures of an entire bridge filled with people, and our national news said it was like 20 people blocking the bridge, which is like a huge lies. And I was wondering, in the context of all of that, how can you overcome the feeling of being like too small to even do anything about it? And in the context of your whole lecture, it's that feeling of melancholy that kind of keeps me, for instance, paralyzed, and I don't know what to do in this age of crisis, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. My stance is very theoretical. So I go there to this, but this is not important if I go to this protest. I'm a big supporter and I'm really present. But my point is that my work concretely consists in this field to actually go to make this analysis. For example, also to recuperate these materials, to share these histories in which now when I talk about an exceptionalism in Slovenia, that is maybe not important for many who are today here with us because they are not from Slovenia. The sheer resemblance of the situation actually shows methodologies that from my point of view, are not intimidating us, but is showing the transformation. And for me, this means that we have to intensify the tools of our analysis, that we have really to put the things on a different scale, as I try to do, because we could blur the things, say they are poor, we cannot do this, we cannot do that. But it's a big differences. I'm against this, what I call Thomas Piketty distribution of our equality of misery. On the opposite, if we understand that exists a history of this melancholy, that our entrampment, our impotency, for example, it's coming out from a whole historical development of different analysis, from psychoanalysis to the way how it was presented, our exceptionality as being subjects of the first world. Now we are subjects of the first world because we are still in this Europe. Doesn't matter if we are maybe a piece of shit as what I say, former Eastern Europeans. Maybe we deserve to be a piece of shit if we have Srebrenica genocide. So I cannot tell anything else about me. If we are from ex-Yugoslavia and we were living in the time of Srebrenica genocide, we don't deserve to be treated better. So, but my point is instead of a certain romanticism, actually even more to radicalize our possibilities to think and to dismantle these mythical figures. So it's very good when I know now that this was the case of the bridge, and I was following, and I was happy about, because I thought it's an important movement. People go on the street and like we are going, maybe with more or less success, but we didn't succeed in Slovenia, but in Belgrade, obviously something was done, something was stopped. At least this was from afar. So my point is, and if we can connect this even to some historical elements, because it's important not to detach us from that was happening 1 decade before or 2 decades before. Because in Slovenia, what was happening in 1992 with the race, what happened after with the Roma people, and what is happening today with the Aliens Act, these things are a history why we found ourselves with a mafia government. This was not just happening to us. There was a history, but this absolute hedonism of not thinking, this incapability of through many structures, also in school, in media, and so on, to just not wanting to understand this, to making mockery of those who talk about these things and finding now themselves in the same. I think this maybe can be a way of how to do this. So to go out of this impotency. This is how I see the importance of analysis, but also of reflection of ourselves, not to put ourselves in some kind of a status of, oh, we poor, because we, it is this tendency, especially in former Eastern Europe, while the brutalities that are produced are enormous. Ex-Yugoslavia is a very good case. Poland, how millions of people can actually be absolutely indifferent of what is going on the Polish-Belarusian border? How millions of people in Europe can be completely silent? And they say, this is the problem of Belarusia, but it's actually a problem of EU. It's a problem of the Occident, of all these rhetorics of the human rights. Where are these rhetoric? If you have a person who is asking for shelter, doesn't matter who brought this person at your a threshold of your state. You have, by the law, to take these people, this person or the family or that thousands of people and give them a shelter. Because this is what it's proclaimed in the civilizational aspect of the Occident, and we are now part, so we cannot put ourselves out and say we are different. And this is not our business, it's our business. So, and what I see, as I said before, this racial colonial divide, this line that is completely put under the parquet, it's coming back as a huge slap on our face, because that history of colonialism and then the coloniality, they are both central for necrocapitalism. We cannot just talk about dying. There it's a moment why necrocapitalism, it's coming to the first stage, let's say, is becoming the main actor. It's coming because paradoxically, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Orient-Occident division that was defunct. We were thinking, Said, all these people, they are dead, everything is a new world, came back with a double, I will say, power, like really Freud saying, what you push down is coming back. And it's actually organizing first necropolitics, the necropolitical that we talk, even more is dividing the necropolitical. And all what we see these consequences in the very center of the Occident that said we are biopolitical and we have nothing to do with this. And this is why the thanatopolitics is so present, because it's again about this intimacy, subjectivity. But as I tried again to show, it's a big difference between thanatopolitics and necropolitics. It's a crucial difference. Thanatopolitics is the old idea of the Occident, this intimacy. And also have, more you want to be immune toward the illness, more you actually also are becoming ill, but your autoimmunization, this hyper autoimmunization actually provoke a disease, because you start to destroy everything, even those who are not affected with this and just want to live. So it's really interesting. I try to be large because I don't have one, but I don't want to say I don't have the answer. I think the answer has to be found in the practice and politics of our work. I go on the street, but unfortunately, this is not enough. So maybe it's necessary to go back to the field, because why to leave theory outside of this and be academic and then to be protesters? I don't see a big division. I think the globality means that you have to took both things and to learn from other experiences and to try to think, you know, why we are here, for example, why we have these lectures, what exceptionalism means, what it will bring for us, and why necropolitics is now popular. And 3 or 4 years ago, nobody was talking about necropolitics. This is also very interesting for me. So, sorry to be extended.
Thank you for a very elaborate answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have let's say 5 minutes more. Are there some other questions? If not, I would like to ask Marina something. Ashim Membe said that the Corona crisis actually reinforced a democratization of power to kill. How do you understand this assertion? And also, in line with this, what actually do you think by the very term pandemic world?
Mm-hmm. I mean, these democratizations to the power to kill, it's quite interesting, because I think I could think about this in a certain semi-cynical way that is not out of the blue. but is not cynical in the pure term of cynicism. Democratization simply means what I said before. It's this fake distribution, because now even not only the state, but even the citizens wants people to be killed and to be put outside of the border. I give another case. On the border with Slovenia and Croatia, or in Croatia, if you think so, in the border, the villagers on the border, they ask our government to come there and to put the barbed wire. They were begging. They said, we want to be protected. And at that point was fantastic for our fascist and mafia government to actually come there and again through plunder and different buyings and money laundering and so on, to put the barbed wire. And now what we have in the last week, we had many cases of drowned refugees, because it's absolutely impossible to pass. So you risk your life. But nobody is talking about this. So this democratization should be taught that, again, this wish for self-immunization, this absolute not willing to have relations to the other, it's a part of this democratic axiom of redistribution. Everybody, as we have to take care by ourselves, like in the feudal times, it was nothing else than only your isolation to be alive, to stay alive. This is what is the main demand. Everybody has to take care. You are responsible, no? They say you are responsible, not the anybody else, but we alone are now in the 21st century with all these technologies, biotechnology, so responsible. So we also are taking this democratization in the most perverse way, not even cynical, but really perverse, and we democratize this wish, this willing that can be direct. People are killed, are beaten, are we know when Trump was talking about the China virus in US, people who were from Asian context, they were afraid. They were attacked in Austria. My students were afraid. They were from China, from Japan, and our impossibility of differentiation of people from so many different nation states in Asia, this is again a racism, made them all equal, no? They were all seen as from Asia. So they were afraid about this. So this is, and pandemic world, I put this because I wanted to talk about this global world through these different cases inside. Just to understand that we cannot talk about our singularity, but we have to really take global neoliberal, global necro-capitalism seriously. It's not named global by default, it's not an adjective. And so to understand also this thesis that thanatopolitics is actually the internalization, while the real externalization is actually necropolitics of what we have in the world and we use so much. Sanya, I see one hand.
Anya, you.
I'm sorry, I know we want to wrap up, but thank you for this lecture. And just given exactly where we went with the discussion, I just wanted to ask, it just dawned on me, if whether you see this sort of, so the way we're sort of discussing the theory, we would maybe be able to argue that new melancholy is actually a symptom of necropolitics. And if this is the case, or is it the case? Because I suppose what I would want to ask, or I'm wondering how you see it, do you think that increased agency actually, you know, in the West, individual agency maybe was a precursor to sort of more necropolitics, exceptionalism, or whether it was really a political kind of top-down movement in order to, you know, like control society and structure that kind of led us here. So I guess I'm asking, you know, whether this is more of a top-down issue as you see it, or whether there are, you know, a lot of aspects, you know, that are actually individual that have contributed to, you know, what we're seeing today as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's also, again, a very good point. I think here it's not about just this simple individual state confrontation. Also necropolitics, necropolitics has to be again seen historically, because necropolitics already is there in the biopolitical by Foucault. This is very, very key to understand that, and the biopolitics is not an invention of Foucault, but is after the Second World War, a moment in which the central element of capitalism, that is the nation state, has to face a change. And this is again coming out of the definitely of the Holocaust. So the Holocaust in the, not even about colonialism, but really the Holocaust, because colonialism was always an exportation of death. So Europe was always seen as, let's say, clean, pure, with all this civilizational project. Death as such was exported out. It was exported through colonialism that lasted centuries and killed such an enormous quantity of people that we talk, we speculate. And this was never put as central in terms, even not to say something from the Occident. Why? Because the wealth, the accumulation of the Occident resides on the wealth of the colonial plunder and dispossession. And this, I think, is really central. If you read analysis like Bobby Banerjee, that wrote in the mid of the 2000s, a fantastic analysis of British colonialism in India, that was not embellished, but clearly to the point. Then you understand necropolitics was there. We didn't have the term. And so to come to this point, the way of constitution of subjectivity, it's going along, because it is about to understand nothing is walking on the street. All our work, it's all the time working onto this to understand what is going on in front of us. The events are preceding our thinking, because we find ourselves, but they are not coming from abroad. They are coming as I say always, an accumulation of things that were going before, and we didn't see this because of many factors: structural racism, intellectual, let's say, self-enclosure, racist national sentiments and rhetorics, ideology that are much bigger. We all contribute to this. If you go to, for example, just to be very plastic, you go to an academy or university in Belgrade, you have a talk about politics or sociology, and you have a talk about memory. Believe me, I can give my hand in the fire or just cut. There is no word about Srebrenica genocide. It's no word about memory and amnesia. It's no word about aphasia. It's no word about, for example, what Žarana Papić called turbo-fascism in Milosevic times, that now it's actually like a metastasis going all over former Yugoslavia, and we are now in this turbo-fascism. We have a fascist government on a turbo key. And we thought, no, we are exceptional. We are, as it was the story, because this was a myth after myth that academics text produced and institutions reproduce and so on. It's a whole structure. So my point will be that this new melancholy is coming out from a set of movements in the society, in this biopolitical to necropolitical, because Recalcati does not have a key about necropolitics. He talks only what he sees in the thanatopolitics. He is struck that actually a new melancholy is possible, because melancholy was always a certain sense. But he says, no, people are at home, young people are at home. They actually talk with their objects. I didn't come to this point because I have a long lecture and it's many quotation after quotation, and digital world doesn't allow all these quotations because it's impossible to follow. But what I want to say, he said, these young people, they are only on the internet. We live in these digital boxes. We are part of this. And he said it's completely no interest whatsoever. And then he made this history that is very interesting. This relation between the subject and the object. The hedonism, the 90s was just excess. I don't want borders. But what you find now, everybody wants borders. They protest, but they want to have the vaccine, or they want to live in their bubbles because they are rich. They can go to their houses, hotels. If you are not rich, you cannot go anywhere. You have to be at home. That means you are in lockdown. You can not. You have your one flat with one room. You have 3 children. You have nothing to put in. I mean, it's a crazy situation. Then somebody says about the refugees, say, kill them. They will take this story, these mythologies. So it's working together. The way of our interpretation, our mythology that we embrace, our specificity, all this. But today, when you talk about the unconscious, again, what I formulated to this necropolitical, I said it's a rational unconscious. We are not, it's not some universal term. We are almost racist by definitions and being the matrix of whites. It's not my goodwill. I can say I'm super, I'm great. No, we are coming from the same mold because we see this European space, and if we are more bastards or more backwards, it's not because we are more stupid, but because it was different histories in the back, and they were tolerated by the Occident. That again, what happened could happen only in the symphony with many actors together, and now is reinforced. It's reinforced through just not on any level having a force who will connect these histories. Because when you start to talk about these things, they go to 1945. But what can 1945, what the fuck we say 1945 can teach you if you live in 2022? Nothing. Because this is a myth. We live now in another context. So I tried just to explain. It's not so simple. The structural racism, the structurality of these implications of the way of new governing of life, distribution of death, the way of perceiving death, because necropolitics was really going on in the time of colonialism. Not only now, but we didn't have the term.
Okay, we're a bit running out of time, but I think that Dira has a probably very important question since, yes, Dira, you may proceed.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep it very brief, but with regard to the mythology and especially sort of propagating mythology or retrieving back into history, something very historical, and bringing it back into context and making it very relevant, as as is happening, for instance, in India, in the current government, we're bringing back mythological, fictional narratives of Ramayana and creating the whole Hindu-Muslim, lots of racial problems as well. Now, I was thinking that from the point of view of this kind of a historical narrative, does it actually help strengthen the voice or the existence of a necropolitical state, because it kind of gives it a facade or a shield for it to operate?
Yeah, in a certain way, yeah, it's absolute. I think you are right. This is what I could see. I could say. I mean, the necropolitical state again is a paradox. Why? Because, as I said before, it was only one term. You talk about state, citizenship, melancholy, unconscious, life, death. Now you talk about slow death. You talk about deading life. You talk about necropolitical state. I think this is a relation that completely changed the way of our perception. This division is not just the individual by, if I think maybe about the laws, but is something more terrifying. It's an what I call it's on. It's such a hyper violent intensification that practically also asks for intensification of our readings and interpretations, but with this also of our, I will say, interventions in the space. Because also the word radical you cannot use. It's forbidden. If somebody say radical theory or radical imaginaries, everybody is freaking out. I just to say why I'm saying this, because maybe to conclude, we organized a project with my student Asma Ayad in Vienna, Muslim contemporary. And then it was a speaker, a wonderful writer from Berlin, and he said, you can say everything, radical left, radical dead, but can you use the word radical Muslim? He said, no way. No way. And it was true. It was full. We were about 100 and even more people there. And it was, I just started to laugh because it was true. So.
Okay, thank you. I think that we approached now the very end of this lecture and very fruitful conversation, that is to say, also lecture series. So the first part of this project. Thank you, Marina, for your time. Fantastic lecture, your extensive and very elaborative answers. We will proceed to our discussion via platform Apparatus over the course of the project. And also I would like to thank to all participants and their valuable questions, references and comments. And as Marina said, to be continued. Stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you very much to you all for your comments and to be here. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.